This show is sponsored by idealworkspace.com, which promotes a healthier way of working through their adjustable standing desk. Check out their latest smart adjustable standing desk at altizen.com, ALTIZEN.com. Welcome to Analyze Asia, the podcast dedicated to dissect the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. In this episode, I speak to Paul Papadimitriou, host of the Layovers podcast. We discuss why the top Asian airlines such as Cathay Pacific and Singapore Airlines are in crisis and the major business opportunities arising from China in the aviation space. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. With the heat in London for once, not raining.
Wow, I'm actually 1 hour time difference from you because I'm currently in Paris for the Le Bourget Air Show.
Yeah, I'm very, very jealous that you are in Paris because the Paris Air Show is happening right now and I was supposed to go and I'm stuck here in London. So I'm very jealous that you're seeing all those planes.
Well, but you're still the aviation expert that most people go to for your podcast, and I'm talking to Paul Papadimitriou, founder of Intelligentsia and host of the Layovers podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts on aviation with Alex Hunter. So Paul, since our last conversation, what have you been up to?
Well, work-wise, always the same. I'm always consulting, designing innovation and building experiences for companies and startups. Been doing many things in the Middle East, in Asia, and in Europe, obviously, because that's where I live. Lots of clients, not the point of this podcast today, but I also work with some of the travel and air travel clients as well. And of course, our little podcast that grows, Layovers. I mean, I run actually other podcasts as well. This one has been fantastically successful with my dear friend Alex. And so we're having a lot of fun and a lot of listeners as well. But I am a big fan of this podcast, so thank you so much for having me once more.
And also recently in the Layovers podcast, you talk about some hackathon events that you are involved in with the airports and airlines, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was called Hack Horizon. It happened early May. We started in Hong Kong, actually. One of the partners was Hong Kong Airport. We even got a tour of behind the scenes. This was absolutely fascinating. Then we went on a flight with British Airways on a 380 back to London. That was a 12 hours and 9 minutes flights. We had the entire premium economy. And then we landed at Heathrow, which was also a partner, where we continued doing the hackathon. And then we went on for one more day at London Partners here in London before. So meaning there were 8 teams that was formed. You know how a hackathons, no teams were formed prior to the start of the event. There were 8 teams. They all were pretty amazing. We had really amazing people from all over the world, people from Brazil, Italy, of course, Asia, China, the US, West and East Coast, and all over Europe. So it was really fascinating. It was a bright success. So I want to thank on your podcast the 4 guys that ran the entire thing, because I was a senior advisor, but I didn't. My hands were not for 18 months because it took actually 18 months to build that. So it was Christy, Costa, Johannes, and I'll repeat their names later on. So I want to thank the team for doing that because it was an amazing success, and a lot of people talked about it.
Paul, today I have invited you because I wanted to discuss with you a very interesting topic that's happening in Asia about Asian airlines in crisis. I'm talking specifically about Cathay Pacific and, of course, my home favorite, Singapore Airlines, who I'm very close to and dear to. But before we start, I probably wanted to ask you, can you provide an overview of Cathay Pacific and Singapore Airlines and their core competency in the aviation space?
Well, nobody wants to be called a high-cost airline versus a low-cost airline. These are traditional carriers, so high-cost carriers, if you want. We'll go into that today in this episode. Both are very fascinating airlines because they are considered probably both of the best airlines in the world in terms of quality, but also in terms of operations. They also have something in common, which is a very large footprint, but a very small home in relative terms. Hong Kong and Singapore, obviously. One, Cathay Pacific, is private. Obviously, there is investment through various vehicles from the state and from China, actually directly as well, mainly China. The other at Singapore is, they like to say they're fully private, but they're actually majority owned by a sovereign fund in Singapore. Obviously, it has operational independency from the state, but it is more traditionally like a flag carrier. So both are flag carriers, one de facto Cathay Pacific, the other one de jure Singapore Airline. They're both, as you just said, are experiencing like a new era. Singapore for years and years and years hadn't seen any losses, which is, for the first time they actually had disclosed losses recently. Cathay Pacific just also announced a round of cost cutting because they are feeling the heat from many angles, from, of course, low-cost carriers in Southeast Asia and APAC, from some of the Middle Eastern carriers, but especially the big thing next to them, which is China. We'll get to then. And Singapore is suffering for similar reasons, most of it obviously due to their, again, high cost legacy. But they are both still, because I don't want people to misunderstand, they might be in crisis. I would say they are more into a period of introspection when they are revisiting what they actually are and what the business model should be.
And just to give some quick facts, Cathay Pacific Airlines is listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. The CEO is currently Rupert Hogg, with a market capitalization of 48.78 HK dollars, which translates to about 6.3 billion. And Singapore Airlines is listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange with the CEO Goh Choon Phong, with a market cap of 11.99 billion. And of course, they are owned by the state sovereign wealth fund, Temasek Holdings, who also owned a lot of investments in most of the startup unicorns in the world. That includes Grab. Everyone is all funded by Temasek. As you have pointed out earlier, that recently both Cathay Pacific and Singapore Airlines have not done well. And I think that Cathay Pacific has recently announced job cuts, and Singapore Airlines have actually swung to Singapore about $138 million loss, and also will be undergoing a transformation. I guess I want to take the question a little bit deeper. What are the changes in the aviation environment that led to them in this current introspection mode and recent problems that they have acquired for themselves now?
I mean, there's many, like I just hinted at before, there's many reasons, obviously. There's not a singular reason. If you ask people, they will say, oh, but of course, the low-cost carriers are here, so why would I choose a high-cost carrier? Again, they don't like to be called high-cost carriers, so let's call them traditional carrier for the rest of the show. So that's obviously one of the biggest points in the past 20, 25 years within the emergence of companies like Southwest, companies like EasyJet Ryanair in Europe, companies like AirAsia, obviously in Southeast Asia and APAC, and many, many others, all across. We don't have to name them all. This is one of the major, biggest disruption, because now people, passengers, travelers who are usually very price sensitive can opt for options that are very much lower than these carriers. The other thing, obviously, is on the other end of the spectrum is the emergence of the three Middle Eastern carriers, Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways, whom I've also taken an approach, if you want, of travel, but by having a cost structure which is probably lower. Why? We will dwell on that also today. But of course, the major point here is they're simply younger. So they have less legacy. There's also no unions in those countries. They might have also less cost structures and probably as well newer planes, which implies also less cost. So this is the two angles. The other things also that have happened, though, it's the world that simply has changed. The expectations of passengers when they travel might have changed as well. Both Singapore and Cathay offer a very high-end product. As I said in the intro of the show, they're probably considered one of the best carriers in terms of the comfort you can get on board, whether it's in economy, coach, or premium economy, or business, or even first. They're like, not a lot of airlines still have first. They do. They both also were interesting, especially Cathay. They introduced premium economy very early. So let's not also say that they have not realized that the market was changing, but they're still used to probably an era where, corporates would pay their employees like high travel costs for, like, let's say, again, business class. This world is changing. The other thing that has changed, of course, is the adoption of technology. I would say, like you and me and other people, we travel and we want to have everything unbundled. We have to make choices on our app. Where do we want to fly? When do we want to fly? And how do we want to fly? Do we want a menu? Don't want to eat in the plane? Do we want that kind of seat, et cetera, et cetera? This is something ongoing that these airlines are reacting to, but late. And something that happens to all airlines, not only Cathay Pacific and Singapore Airlines, they also are a bit bogged down by legacy software. I mean, most people might not realize that the airline industry uses software in the back end, stuff that you guys don't see as travelers, that is sometimes very old. And it's not just by snapping your fingers or creating yet another startup that you will be able to solve that. So all these things make it harder in an era where obviously everybody from corporates to the individuals is thinking about price, is being very price sensitive. I will add one thing both for these two markets. They were basically the innovators. They were the disruptors, because they were, I said earlier in the show, at the top of the show, that very small footprint in terms of geography, but very large footprint in terms of destinations and coverage of these airlines, because they realize, as the countries, one of which you're lucky to live in, that, what is the competitive advantage? The competitive advantage is to have like a very business-friendly environment, and we need to attract the people to come to have business with us, and we need to send our people to make business with others. So they made the blueprint of what became other companies like Emirates later on. They have the same type of blueprint. They were innovators, and now that probably in terms of geography, they're not as lucky as Dubai, because if you look at Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, pretty much 80 to 90% of the world is at reach by 8 hours. Being in Hong Kong or Singapore is not exactly similar, hence a bit more difficulty. And I'll finish with one point, and then we'll debate on that, is probably the management. I'm not here to bash any management, but like any company that's been around for a long time might have some inertia. And in these two cases, especially in the case probably of Cathay Pacific, there's a lot of people saying that the people that work at Cathay Pacific have always been coming from Swire, which is the parent company. It's a conglomerate that has its ends in many, many other type of businesses. And probably having new blood from outside will also help. This is something they're now looking into. Singapore Airlines was always a bit better at this, but maybe there's also something there.
Well, Singapore Airlines have not taken any foreign CEO before, actually. It's probably one of the few Singapore enterprises that have not taken a foreign CEO. This is very interesting because both airlines have faced intense competition, such as Emirates Airlines from the high end and AirAsia from the low end. Can you describe what Emirates and AirAsia have done that actually led to this current state? I mean, AirAsia, for example, has done a lot of work in ultra long haul flights, and I think Emirates have made the business class experience of Singapore Airlines but cheaper. That has also disrupted the Singapore Airlines premium flight business.
Yeah, I will say one thing to introduce this little chapter first is that, most people think in terms of low cost versus high cost, basically, right? We think about traditional carrier on the one end and like low cost carriers, whether they're short haul, medium haul, or long haul on the other hand. This is usually the way we think about it. You have to meddle that reality a bit, because what actually matters for airlines is the cost versus revenue. Like every company, there's the one metric we call the cost per available seat per mile or per kilometer, depending on which metric you are in, and compared to the revenue per available seat, mile, or kilometer again. So meaning it's the differential that matters, because if I give you only the cost and not the revenue, then you might have this good, like let's take an example. If I take United has been on the news recently for many, many reasons, usually bad reasons. Their cost is around $13 per available seat mile. The cost of someone like British Airways, live in London, is about $7.50. And then the cost for someone like Norwegian, which is a very disruptive airline, is 5 cents. So it's very, very low. But if I just give you this, you realize that obviously Norwegian, thus companies like AirAsia, which also have very, very low cost structures, are very good at maintaining very low costs. The problem is that they also sell tickets at a very low cost. So it doesn't mean by definition that they are able to make a lot of money out of it. Hence, not all the low cost airlines that have sprouted over the last 5 years, let's say, have survived, because it's not just about making a low cost. The thing that Emirates has, that Qatar Airways has, and that Etihad have is obviously they are newer airlines, so they have a different cost structure than other airlines. What they do is they have, first of all, a very, let's say, tax-friendly environment, obviously. Emirates is a company that was also funded by, if you want, the sovereign wealth fund of Dubai. So a very similar idea than Singapore, but years later. So they have younger staff, less cost, not unionized staff, less cost. They have younger fleet. They also have almost a dual fleet, almost only A380s and 777s. They still have the odd other older planes, but they're ditching them very, very fast. So it's also reduces maintenance costs when an aircraft is newer. And it also, of course, if you have almost only one or two types of aircraft, also reduces again maintenance costs, because you don't have to have various different maintenance structures for different aircrafts. So this is obviously a few other things obviously that these guys got is the luck of the geography. And this is very important, a company like Emirates, Dubai is not a big oil producer. So it's a bit of a myth that they get a lot of advantages of being located there. We can discuss obviously about Etihad and Qatar Airways, but at least for Emirates, it's not the case. They're buying their oil, they're on the market like pretty much everybody does. And this is a very important point that I'll get back to when talking about Cathay a bit later today. So this is also, so basically their cost structure is very low. The other thing that is important, and that's very similar from both Hong Kong and Cathay, both from Singapore and Singapore Airlines, and for Dubai Airport, DXB, and Emirates, is that the fate of these airlines is very much linked to the airport. Right now, for instance, Hong Kong Airport has introduced newer tax landing fees because they're building a third runway in Hong Kong, and they have to finance that third runway. That increases the cost, obviously, for someone like Cathay Pacific, that I think has more than 50% of landing and departures from Hong Kong Airport. So it's a big cost. The Hong Kong Authority has also capped the fees that the airlines can make passengers pay, which means that the only way for someone like Cathay to actually find other sources of revenues if they don't have access to higher fees is to increase flight prices. There's also a big investment, of course, happening right now in Singapore. You see it every time I land to Singapore. I see this big structure that is being built in the middle. Again, stuff that will also impact the cost structure of Singapore. And similarly in Dubai Airport Authority is building the second airport. DXB is at capacity. There's no more room to grow. So they're building this massive, huge 250 million passengers per year airport, which is not ready yet. I mean, you can already land there, but it's small. So basically, the cost structure here is different. What AirAsia and such companies have done, obviously, is very similar. They also rely usually on one or two aircraft. So again, to reduce the cost, they have also very low cost structures in terms of staff because people, that's the same reality. It might be sometimes that your employees are not as well protected. We have something called, for instance, in the UK, 0 hours contract. So you basically staff waits and until they're being needed, and when they're being needed, they're being called by the airline and they have to go. There's not a guaranteed time per month or week they have to work. Stuff like that. These cost structures are the reason why these airlines have succeeded. But obviously, at the same time, some part of customer experience. AirAsia has a very good branding, for instance. He's very appealing since very young. Tony Fernandez is also someone kind of brash, and you want to be friends with him and have a beer with him. He also helps. It's like a bit like a Richard Branson when he launched Virgin, whichever Virgin, they launched many Virgins. It's this kind of feeling of being a young company and you want to be part of, and the staff will be younger. It will be fun. Which will make you forget that actually the legroom is not that big, and et cetera, et cetera. And as you said, very, very rightfully so, Emirates has done a great job in premium. So I'm talking about here business class and first, because they don't have a premium economy, but that's coming in 2018. But they are also, because that's the thing, they are also now awakening to the reality of costs. Not that they were never, because it's a very well-run airline, but they have also announced that they're looking to cost cutting. They have removed first class for some of their 380s. They're introducing, as I just say, a premium economy in some of their flights next year, probably. They are thinking of newer seats to actually add more capacity in each aircraft. So these are things that is all happening to every airline in the world. I will say, and I know that some people will disagree, but I will say that out of the 3 Middle Eastern carriers, probably, Emirates is a more normal airline. Etihad might be receiving some subsidies, clearly. And Qatar Airways, it's a big question mark. How much subsidies are they getting? But now they're suffering for other reasons. If anybody has seen the news, they might be getting in a rough patch. So this is, again, it's really the cost structure versus the revenue. And Emirates has done a stellar job in the past 30 years of doing that. Will they be able to continue? I'm not sure. But what is certain is that on the other side, people like Singapore and Cathay will have to think of cramming more people into their aircrafts, and thus might actually lose a bit of this ideal of being like this great airline wherever you see it in the aircraft. Maybe at some point they will have to add more people, thus less legroom and less width for the seats.
So in your opinion, what are the potential solutions for both Cathay Pacific and Singapore Airlines to turn around? Because they're so burdened with traditional cost structures as compared to the newer airlines such as AirAsia and Emirates.
Yeah, the one thing here I will say, because it's very important, because I didn't say at the beginning, the major part of the loss of Cathay Pacific was due or is due to bad, and I put that in bracket, bad bets on the hedging fuel market. All airlines, especially those who don't have any access to a local market of oil, they just don't dig a hole in the ground, have to buy oil, have to buy kerosene on the market. And what airlines do, they act as financial vehicles, and they buy with hedging into 2, 4, 5, sometimes even more years in the future. What happened is that Cathay Pacific took bets on 5 years, so they set a price, for 5 years, and then lost their bet. So basically, they had to pay back on these when these options matured. So they lost money on betting to the future. They've actually announced that they will now do only futures for 2 years and not 5 years. But that's one of their newer decisions. So this is sometimes, I'm not going to say bad luck, but it's really hard to forecast what the oil price will be in 2 to 4 years. And airlines, the fuel being when you fly in an airplane, whether you're in an airplane, the biggest cost of you, Bernard, being in the airplane is actually the jet fuel in the airplane. So this actually varies very much, and airlines have to think about the future. For the rest, as you hinted at, yes, they have to probably think about hiring external people, that fresh blood, like startups, like you do, like you work with corporates. I know you do stuff. You have to find people that diverge, not only people that converge. If everybody agrees that we are a great airline, that's not enough. I'm not saying it's that dire. I'm saying that they need to attract talent from outside, people that come up with different solutions. On a very simply quote the CEO of United, I know he's not very in fashion these days, but I think he's right on one thing. He says we have to get used to tighter seating. I think he's right, because every single time an airline, whichever that is, tried to augment the comfort of the seat, especially in coach, which is the majority of seats in a plane, well, people were not ready to pay more for a flight. So at the end of the day, if they can cram more seats and the price of a flight is less, well, people will buy more. The load factor, which is the number of people in each flight on average, will be higher. Shareholders will be happy. The airline will actually thrive. This is actually what United does. They can be hated for many things, but they make a lot of money. They are protected. This is another debate. But the meaning that I think that Cathay and Singapore will have to rethink a bit some part of the comfort, sadly. I know it's a sad reality. But what they also should do is probably use more the technologies that are available to us to actually, you will be cramming the flight. So let's find technologies around that makes your comfort and your customer experience, your passenger experience slightly better, which of course is the use of everything mobile, which is the use of streaming Wi-Fi, with all the little things that you'll say, oh, well, you know what, I'll be choosing this airline instead of another, because otherwise companies like AirAsia will eat the market. And let's Norwegian, I just mentioned Norwegian. Norwegian is opening a route from Europe to Singapore. So these are the airlines that soon people will choose to just think about price, no matter the quality. And then at that point, it will be too late for Singapore Cathay. So they will have to react. I still think, however, there remains a market for companies like Cathay in Singapore, because not everybody wants to be in super cramped seats. Not everybody wants to be in airlines that might not care as much as you as a passenger.
So this sounds very strange to me, because a lot of my friends from outside Singapore love Singapore Airlines because of the seat comfort. So, in the digital world, we think about the best UI UX. People like Apple products because it is the most comfortable gadget to use. They like the iPhones because of that. Why can't customers when they choose airlines, care about the customer experience? Because sometimes for me, as a Singaporean, I find that taking Singapore Airlines is just too expensive. If they just cut their price by 20%, which is more than the new upcoming airlines, they will still get the people to actually buy their tickets. The problem is that their cost seems to be getting so high that to afford a Singapore airline ticket is just impossible if you become price sensitive.
Yeah, but I agree. But one caveat here: the issue with the airline industry as a whole is the margins are very low. So just saying I'll cut by 20%, again, you have to find a way to cut costs by 20%, which is really hard. Any airline, I'm not even talking only about Singapore Airlines, for instance, it could be EasyJet. It's really, really tough we've seen the results of the cost-cutting programs of BA with all their issues they've been having in the past 3 years, especially the last one with the IT thing. I mean, might not be related to cost cutting, but I mean, it's clearly going downwards, and you don't want that for Singapore. The other thing, the other caveat is very big, is that you are at the mercy of the market. You know, when you choose a phone, you just say, oh, let's choose a phone between the Samsung S8 and an iPhone 8 whenever it'll come out, and I know the OnePlus 5 that just came out or something. Well, you know, you can choose. When you are at Singapore International Changi, there's a limit number of slots available at the airport, and you cannot have every single airline at that airport. At some point, there's a capacity limit of how many aircrafts can land and depart from that airport. I know they're all rushing to add, you know, runways, etc. But at the end of it is a limit geographically of the number of runways you can have in Singapore. So meaning that it's not, the competition is not the same as going to any store and finding different phones. There's a possibility of having too many airlines. Though you're right, you know, at some point people make decisions with their seats. But that, as I said earlier, sadly, the reality is that most people think about price only when they buy a flight. I mean, I'm not talking about people that might be corporate, that might get a business class, or of course wealthy people, or people that love their experience in flight and are ready to put some money. But most people will only think about the price. So you, Bernard, you just said, I mean, I love Singapore Airlines. Firmly, Singapore and Cathay are amongst my favorite airlines in terms of the comfort, in terms of the quality of their service, in terms of the food, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the day, I'm going 3-4 times in Asia in July, and Singapore Airways is, for instance, is always one of the airlines that we'll look at. They're always super expensive. I mean, no matter how much I love them, at one point, there's still the fact that, well, you know what, I might just choose another one because it's less expensive, no matter the quality of the seat. So I think that the solution will probably come as well with newer kind of seats. Paris Air Show, you might have some, but this is not a primary passenger experience show. It's primarily an aircraft show. I mean, you've probably seen maybe the Qatar Airways new Q Suite and stuff like that. But if you go to, there's a big trade in Germany, there's others. There are now also a lot of innovation happening in the seats, finding seats that are much thinner, that allow more people, you know, to be closer together whilst actually not losing that much space for you. There will be probably some innovation that will dampen a bit here the suffering, I will say. But most probably, Bernard, the future will be that if you want to have some good legroom and a good seat, you'll have to pay for prime economy or above, which even companies like AirAsia are understanding. They will also offer you a slightly better product if you're ready to pay for it. We will have to pay for more comfort, full point. At some point on the other end of the spectrum, there's been seat designs for people semi-standing, for instance. None of these were authorized yet. It's Ryanair that was looking into it. I'm not sure we'll get there, but if we ever get there, there might be at some point also regulations that come into play to say, okay, there's maybe a limit to what humans can suffer. Maybe some governments will say that. Maybe IATA will come together. I don't know. Let's not forget that a plane has to be able to be evacuated in 90 seconds. If people are so much crammed that they cannot move between their seats in a flight, you cannot evacuate a plane in 90 seconds in case of an incident. That's the limit. Honestly, I don't know. I agree with you that it will be about the customer experience, but at the end of the day for airlines, sadly, people think price.
Let's not talk about Cathay and Singapore from the context of some of the intense competition they're facing in the region, but there is a market that's about to be opened up, because I know that China has been buying Airbus and Boeing planes and it's going to gear up to open up the market, which in turn setting up more domestic flights. I guess my question would be, how do you see the Chinese aviation market look like, at least in the next 1 year?
This market is amazing. It's the transformative market. It's, of course, you are the Paris Air Show. Everybody wants to sell planes there. They're Boeing, I think, forecast that by 2035, there's a demand for at least 5,000 to 7,000 narrow bodies, you know, so when you have a single AL, and maybe 2,000 wide bodies, you know, so 777s, etc. So it's a huge market. It's a $1 trillion market. It's the first ever $1 trillion market, and there's still so many people that haven't ever flown, or people people that have flown only once and want to fly again, because flying is something that gets addictive, obviously, when you do it. If you look at simply at the air passenger traffic in China, I think that maybe 15 years ago there were maybe 4 million people have ever had flown or something, and then suddenly it goes to like numbers of 400 to 500 million. It's just literally immense growing. At the beginning, obviously, most of it is domestic, thus the demand for the aircraft you just mentioned, but also demands for Embraer, for Bombardier, also in Mitsubishi, the new one, smaller aircraft, because not all the airports in China are made. I'm not talking about the runways. I'm talking about the facilities to deplane and board aircraft. And obviously the COMAC, they are doing their own version of Boeing on our Airbus in China. And that will be successful. I'm absolutely certain. I hate the naysayers that are saying, it's a bad plane. I'm pretty sure it's an awesome plane and it will actually take off also very fast. So that's phase one. People flying within China, a lot. But the biggest one, of course, for the rest of the world are people flying outside of China. And this is growing also super, super fast. But as you know, there's still limitations for visa purposes. This will explode at some point. I think it almost more than doubles every year already. I've seen, I travel, as you know, a lot. And I see more and more Chinese, and I'm talking tourists, I'm not talking business people, which I've always seen, but tourism, I've seen in the most, remote places in Eastern Europe where I would never think about seeing Chinese nationals. I've seen them more and more. I've seen airports in Eastern Europe, in Southern Europe, where they have signs in Chinese now, signage within the airport in Chinese as well. That tells you a lot about this market, and everybody is salivating. So yes, it's a huge market that will grow like crazy. Some people say it might not grow as fast as it can. Yeah, because when you reach already like 500 million people traveling, it might not go like a triple digit every year, but it will grow, and there's a huge demand. The thing that is important here for Cathay Pacific, this is why, Cathay Pacific has a company called Cathay Dragon, which is their airline looking into mainland China. Air China owns part of Cathay Pacific as well. There were even rumors at some point that Air China would acquire Cathay Pacific. I don't think that will happen. It also would require the change of the Hong Kong law. But anyway, just to say that Cathay Pacific is also, we mentioned AirAsia before, Emirates on the other side, and others, and suddenly you saw Chinese carriers that are coming up, and it's not the story. A lot of people who never travel to China have these very bad, ideas of what Chinese airlines are. No, they are. Of course, clearly, some Chinese airlines, the small ones might not be, but come on, but they are juggernauts that will open up to the world, that will see more and more, and that will change the landscape of travel for us as well. 5 years ago, if I wanted to commute to Asia, I would have never looked at the Chinese airlines, so they would not even been offered on tools like Google Flight or Skyscanner, etc. Now they are. China Southern, China Eastern, Air China, etc., etc. So the market it's absolutely immense, and I think it will really it will change the way we travel. As in, it will suddenly have an inflow of Chinese nationals all around the world, and this is where everybody's salivating. And you know what? I welcome it.
Here's the eventual reality. Do you think that the Chinese airlines will eventually crush all the other Asian airlines that includes Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines, AirAsia within the region?
Crush, I don't know. What I know is that because, it takes time to build an airline, to make it quality, to have people believe in the brand and then choose them to fly, et cetera, et cetera. What is certain is that at least right now, Chinese conglomerates, Chinese companies have a lot of cash to spend. So they could simply buy them. They don't even have to crush them. They simply buy them. So that's something that could happen. Will it happen? I'm not sure, but it could happen. What is also certain is that, Cathay Pacific and Singapore pioneered this play of, hub and spoke, small geography, like one single airport going all around the world. That inspired, of course, again, companies like Emirates. What prevents, even if geography is different, what prevents a company based in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Guangzhou, to try the same play, to say, you know what, we're going to focus on one single airport and we're going to drive people from all around the world through our airport somewhere else. This could happen, and they could find also maybe a very business-friendly environment with very low taxes, with not a lot of unions. And I'm not here, by the way, to bash the unions. I'm just talking about reality. It could happen. It just takes one or two, visionaries, and China has a lot of visionaries, great entrepreneurs, to simply build that. So Yeah, they could crush it. I think more likely, I don't foresee Singapore Airlines or Cathay Pacific being crushed. I don't foresee AirAsia to be crushed either. Again, unless, very big black swan events. But I see the Chinese becoming very big companies and maybe acquiring some of those guys possibly in the future. Yeah.
I know you do the Layovers podcast, and one of the things I really enjoy on your podcast is about technology and innovation in the aviation industry. So I want to ask you this question. Any interesting solutions that might change the game for airlines other than seats?
Well, there's many. I mean, first of all, I think one of the... No, I mean, there's a lot of little things, that change here. So for instance, just, Level. Level is a company that was created by IAG, which is a parent company of Iberia and BA. It's a long-haul, low-cost airline. They just started. They have 4 planes. It's basically Iberia with a different name. They have one thing that is super cool. You're in the flight and you can pair your phone with the IFE, the screen in front of you, and suddenly it's not about controlling it, is that you can purchase stuff on the IFE through a card that is already logged into your phone, Apple Pay, etc. These are little things that make the whole thing easier. When I was doing the Hack Horizon, the hackathon in the plane, there were some guys that came up with such brilliant ideas that actually airlines told us they were interested in. And again, IFE, you have the screen in front of you. Usually you watch a movie or maybe a TV show, maybe a documentary, but there's only so far you can go. But there's more interactivity to be built between that and your tablet, laptop, smartphone, obviously. And you could, let's say, one of the ideas was to say, I'm going to Singapore to meet with Bernard, but I have lots of free time. What should I do? Well, you can build a trip when you're on the air and suddenly have it transferred to your phone when you finish it. And as soon as you land in the US connectivity, everything is bought for you. So let's say I wanted to buy, the boat to there and that, this and that, and everything is actually pre-bought for me. I already done that in the flight. There's little things that actually change. The very big thing I think that we don't see that will change, of course, is we just mentioned that there's a boom expected in travel, which will mean that more and more of the major airports will be at capacity, will be crammed with aircraft, which is why we see a lot of these, aircraft like 787s, A350s, probably in the future 797, because, they can have quite a lot of people and don't take too much time to do a turnaround. So the time they are on the ground, but at some point we will need extra capacity. So smaller airports like Low Cost Love or extra airports, and we have like air control towers now. So you don't have any humans. Everything is sensors and everything is algorithms, and they actually can fly you at some point. Already planes are pretty much a lot automated. I'm not saying that we'll have, driverless or pilotless planes tomorrow, but this is also coming. We will also probably get the big innovation for passengers, I think, will be a transformation of the GDS, of the infrastructure that allows you to buy tickets. Because, like you said earlier very well, you were used to use a smartphone, and I want to choose stuff. I want my smartphone in rose gold, and I want my smartphone this size, and I want this and this and this. I can, you can have a menu of what you want. Still, for airlines, it's difficult because they don't have the right software to do that. And again, I know startups try, but it's a very industry-wide issue that will require a lot of standards, because there's always a lot of stuff involved here. The day you can go and press a button and say, I want this flight for only one way, and on this flight I want this type of menu, and I already want Wi-Fi. These little options, amenities you can decide on, which some airlines are trying to bolt on when you book, but still most can't. This will be already a huge step. I know it doesn't look like one, because you're like, oh, of course. I mean, it's super easy to do. It's not, at least in the airline industry, and I think that will also change the ease of thinking about traveling, like last minute travel, press a button. So this is something that will change. Other than that, although I just mentioned IFE, we know the in-flight entertainment, for those who, sorry, because I've been using the acronym since the beginning. Some airlines are ditching it because it's too much weight, So you will be, of course, for instance, you still already can go in summer in the US or in Europe. I think as well, I've seen that in Asia, where they are streaming Wi-Fi and streaming content directly to your tablet. Simple things like that actually make the lives of the passengers a bit easier. There's been trials of having virtual headsets, virtual reality headsets on your head. So basically you forget that you have a bad experience in the flight because you're somewhere else. I'm not sure that will ever take off, especially for safety reasons, but I mean, why not? I think right now, I don't see, anything like too science fictiony. I think people still want to go from A to B at a lower cost. So whatever amenity you can give them around is what actually makes you win, along with, of course, the brand, the quality, the sense of safety and sense of welcoming. This is the thing that people hate United for a reason. People suddenly start to hate BA for a reason, but people still love Norwegian. So at some point, it's, this is something that matters when you make a choice of choosing which aircraft you're going to fly.
Paul, it's always great to have you on the show to talk about the aviation industry in Asia. And of course, I will highly recommend the Layovers podcast, but help my audience. How do they find you?
So layovers.to. Just Google my last name. It appears on the show. It's impossible to pronounce. Papadimitriou. I'm always that's very good for SEO. I'm always on top. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter. I mean, it's pretty much everywhere. As everyone, WeChat, Line, everything. I'm mostly active on Facebook and Twitter, being in Europe, obviously. So yeah, you can find me anywhere and you can ask me any question, but please simply tune in to layovers.to, the Layovers podcast. Simply search for Layovers on any podcast app or on SoundCloud. There's so much more we could have talked about. There's, data and customer experience, and we'll do another show. But if you like that kind of stuff, we do that every 2 weeks for 1 hour. It's great for a run, and I know that Bernard loves the show, so thank you.
And you can find me at bleongcw@bernardleong.com. Subscribe to us at Analyze Asia, ANALYSE Asia. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Acast, and of course TuneIn plus Google Play in the US market. Of course, give me a iTunes 5-star ratings, or recommend us on Overcast, and of course, at all times, tweet to me your comments on the show. And we have a newsletter, and please subscribe to our newsletter and follow us, as the Analyze Asia site is going to be undergoing some big changes. So once again, Paul, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Bernard.